Today we'll be talking about the top 10 risks that threaten project portfolio management success. The agenda of these top 10 risks are broken down into three parts. Part 1, getting started with project portfolio management. Part 2, advancing project portfolio management. And Part 3, sustaining value. Now, I should note that these top 10 risks were arrived at after a year of research and after working with the leading providers of project portfolio management applications like CA Clarity, HPPPM, PlanView, Primavera, CompuWare, AppTask, Adaptive, Power Steering, Enitas, and many, many others. And the idea for this actually happened years back at a very good Camp IT Project Portfolio Management Summit. Dan Horwitz, the conference organizer, asked the attendees before a particular project portfolio management summit why they had come to the event. And as he was writing the reasons on his flip chart paper as to why folks were coming to the event, it was becoming apparent that the various reasons that the people were attending this project portfolio management conference were not in line with the conference presentation topics. So while the conference was quite good, and a lot of the presenters talked about people, process tools, portfolio management, software as a service versus traditional installations, cost per user, total cost of ownership of project portfolio management tools, a lot of these types of things were already understood, and quite frankly, it was a lot of the risks and difficulties with getting a PPM initiative underway that was the reason most of the folks in attendance had come. And then after a year of research, these top 10 risks were very similar to those very same risks that were mentioned years back at that project portfolio management conference. So without further ado, let's get started into the top risks. The first risk is shared vision, mission, goals, and objectives of the project portfolio management performing organization, or lack thereof. Now, in many organizations, the discussion of project portfolio management is often like the proverbial three blind men describing an elephant. Everybody has an idea and a description of what it is, but oftentimes it's not the same thing. Now, we do have institutions and organizations that can help us understand project portfolio management from best practice. And though well-intended, sometimes these institutions, though we may understand being part of the practicing community, present things in such a way that it's hard to get organizational buy-in of the executive team. And a good example of that is the image that you see in the lower left-hand corner that shows the organizational governance, where you have strategic planning, and on the left-hand side you have business operations, and on the right-hand side you have portfolio, program, project management, and process tools and metrics. Now, many of you may represent this from one of the illustrations in the Project Management Institute Portfolio Management Standard. And this representation makes intuitive sense for those of us in the project management fold. I certainly understand it. The idea that operations and projects are two different business entities, and the management of projects is different than the management of operations. But the challenge is, for those not familiar with the practice, it can be seemingly an idea that a management by projects function is as large and as important in scale as a management of operations function. And for many organizations, that might be a difficulty in getting started with executives outside the project management fold, thinking that the PMO or the PPM performing organization is seeking to build up an empire. And by the way, operations in this context of this image is supposed to mean business operations, but I can tell you in the past, I've seen many people present this exact same diagram and refer to that operations block as IT operations. So again, whether or not the image is accurate or helpful, I think it is to an extent. To those outside the project management practicing community, it's not that helpful in terms of establishing a shared vision of what project portfolio management is all about. Also not that helpful is a discussion of project portfolio management that many enthusiasts advise that project portfolio management allows you to manage a portfolio of projects like you would a portfolio of stocks and bonds. In reality, this is ill-advised. Projects are not financial instruments that can be started and stopped and just moved around. Perhaps the analogy helps for some, and again, I certainly appreciate the simplicity of the analogy, but executives oftentimes don't appreciate it. And in fact, the Vice President of American Express, who manages the project portfolio management function, begs in one of his presentations and white papers, stop saying manage your project portfolio like a portfolio of stocks and bonds. This oversimplified complement is dangerous, in addition to being meaningless. And I guess a good example is if you have a financial portfolio and your advisor comes to you and says, or comes to me and says, Mark, I'd like to make some fine adjustments. If you don't mind, we're going to change up the portfolio. We'll reduce your risk and we'll provide a greater return. I'd probably say, thank you. Where do I sign? But you can just imagine a team of executives where in a portfolio management function, one executive is being told that his project and the only project he cares about is going to be suspended or terminated. The leadership team is far less likely to have an appreciation for that type of advice, nor is it something that an expert can just do in a corner office room without a high degree of collaboration and participation with others. The other risk that was an apparent risk was executive level support. Oftentimes, the executive team supports a PMO and PPM initiative initially, but sometimes that support wanes over time. Now, again, in the practicing community, many PMO enthusiasts advise, whenever you're setting up a PMO or commencing a PPM function, the three things you need to do. First, pick a PMO model. And you know all the models: weather station, control tower, fighter squadron, coaching model, report model, and on and on. Second, list out the roles and responsibilities. And third, make sure to sell and continue to sell the PMO to executives. Because if you don't sell the value of the PMO, how will the executives know what it is? And if we don't sell the value of PPM, how will they know what it is? But in reality, many people advocate, and I'm one of them, selling the PMO is a telltale sign of trouble ahead. Many people believe, and I am in this camp, that selling the PMO is an inappropriate approach. It's a signal that the PMO has not been stood up properly in the first place. And by the way, the PMO is not ours to sell. For most organizations, the PMO exists to serve its constituents, and when the constituents are involved in that mandate, the PMO doesn't need to sell itself, it just needs to fulfill the mandate. So the universal truth is that when the PMO or project portfolio management performing function is set up correctly, there's never a need to sell it just to achieve the mandate. Now, for those of you that speak Japanese or recognize the symbol, that term is nemawashi, and it refers to a technique that many people advocate is a great technique for continuing to get executive involvement. It basically says whether you charter your PMO every year or once with periodic updates, it's quite important to work with each of the constituents, executive constituents of the PMO, to get their view on what's the purpose of the PMO. What goals, objectives should be put in place for the PMO to be held on account. And these aren't KPIs. We'll get into this a little bit later. And then as the leadership team, they need to get together with the assistance of the project portfolio management performing executive to establish a universal and unanimous view of that. So not 10 different views, but one view as to the mandate, one view as the top 2, 3, 4, 5 goals to be achieved, one view as the measurable objectives. And then once that's set up, the PMO need not spend time selling the concept of the PMO, rather fulfilling the mandate and achieving the objectives that the constituents of the PMO have put in place. Again, the idea, the leadership team established the mandate, the